Guys, Miss Swanson here. We are going to continue our reading for Racing in the Rain. I apologize that it's been a little while since I've uploaded anything. I was having some issues with YouTube and then I lost my video and issues. So we're going to start fresh with a new video today, starting with chapter 35. Last we left, Enzo's owner, Denny, had lost his wife to cancer, and he's really struggling with his wife's parents because they want to take custody of Zoe, their daughter, and he is just not having it. But the problem is he doesn't have the money to hire the good lawyers and continue to go to court with them. So he's not looking too optimistic at this point. We know that Enzo's feeling really sad about it as well. He misses Zoe, and Enzo loves racing in the car. So hopefully in these next couple chapters, he'll be able to get in the car again. All right, here we go. Chapter 35. I love very few things more than a nice long walk in the drizzle of Seattle. I don't care for the heaviness of real rain. I like the misting, the feeling of the tiny droplets on my muzzle and eyelashes. While rain is heavy and can suppress the scents, a light shower actually amplifies smells. It brings odor to life and then carries it through the air to my nose, which is why I love Seattle more than any other place, even Thunderhill Raceway Park. Because once the damp season begins, a nary day goes by without a helping of a much-loved drizzle. Denny took me for a walk in the drizzle, and I loved it. Denny seemed to crave the change, too. Instead of jeans, a sweatshirt, and his yellow slicker, he put on a pair of dark slacks, and he wore his black trench coat over a high-necked cashmere sweater. We walked north out of Madison Valley and into the Arboretum. Once past the dangerous part, where there was no walkway, we turned off on the smaller road, and Denny released me from my leash. This is what I love to do. I love to run through a field of wet grass that has not been mowed recently. I love to run, keeping my snout low to the ground so the grass and the sparkles of the water cover my face. I imagine myself as a vacuum cleaner, sucking in all the smells, all the life. A spear of summer grass. It reminds me of my childhood, back on the farm in Spangle. There was no rain, but there was grass. There were fields, and I ran. I ran and I ran that day, and Denny walked on, trudging steadily. At the point where we usually turned around, we kept going. We crossed the pedestrian bridge and curled up into Mont Lake. Denny reattached my leash, and we crossed a larger road, and we were in a new park. I loved this one too, but it was different. Interlaken, Denny said to me as he unleashed me. Interlaken. This park was not fields and flat land. It was a twisty ravine painted with vines and bushes and ground cover. Above it was tented by the tallest of trees and a canopy of leaves. It was wonderful. As Denny followed the path, I bounded up and down the hillside, hiding in the low brush and pretending I was a secret agent, or running as fast as I could through the obstacles and pretending I was a predator like in the movies, hunting something down, tracking my prey. For a long time we walked and ran in the park, me running 5 paces for every one of Denny's, until I was exhausted and thirsty. We emerged from the park and walked into a neighborhood that was new to me. Denny stopped in a cafe to purchase a cup of coffee for himself. He brought some water for me, which was in a paper cup and difficult to drink, but I managed. And we continued walking. I was getting quite tired. We had been out for more than 2 hours, but we kept walking. I recognized 15th Avenue when we reached it, and I knew Volunteer Park quite well. But I was surprised when we went into Lakeview Cemetery. I had never been there before. Following the paved road to the north, we looped around the central hill and came upon a temporary tent structure, under which many people were assembled. They were all dressed nicely, and those who weren't, protected from the drizzle by the rain, were holding umbrellas. Immediately, I saw Zoe. Ah, now I understood. Denny had dressed for Eve's burial. We approached the people who were milling about, their attention fragmented. The proceedings had not yet begun. We got very close to them, and then, suddenly, someone broke off from the group. A man, and then another man, and another. The three of them walked toward us. One of them was Maxwell. The others were Eve's brothers, whose names I never knew because they showed themselves so infrequently. "You're not welcome here," Maxwell said sternly. "She's my wife," Denny said calmly, "the mother of my child." She was there, the child. Zoe saw her father. She waved at him, and he waved back. "You're not welcome here," Maxwell said again. "Leave, or I'll call the police. We have a restraining order." "Why are you doing this?" asked Denny. Maxwell pushed up into Denny's personal space. "You've never been good to Eve," Maxwell said, "and I will not trust you with Zoe." "But I did nothing wrong." But Maxwell had already turned. "Please escort Mr. Swift away from here," he said to his two sons, and he abruptly walked away. In the distance, I saw Zoe, unable to contain herself any longer. She jumped out of her seat and ran toward us. "Beat it," one of the men said. "It's my wife's funeral," Denny said. "I'm staying." Zoe reached us and leapt at Denny. He hoisted her into the air and propped her up on his hip, and he kissed her cheek. "How's my baby?" he said. "How's my daddy?" she replied. "I'm getting by," he said. Trish rushed up to us. She inserted herself between Denny and the brothers. She told them to leave, and she turned to Denny. "Please," she said. "I understand why you're here, but it can't be done like this. I really don't think you should stay." She hesitated for a moment, and then she said, "I'm sorry. You must be so alone." Denny didn't respond. I looked up at him, and his eyes were full of tears. Zoe noticed, too, and started crying with him. "It's okay to cry," she said. "Grandma says crying helps because it washes away the hurting." He looked at Zoe for a long moment, and she at him. Then he sighed sadly. "You help Grandma and Grandpa be strong, okay? I have some important business to take care of. About Mommy. There are things that have been done." "I know," she said. "You'll stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a little while longer. But until I get everything worked out, okay?" "They told me I might stay with them for a while," said Zoe. "Well," Denny said regretfully, "Grandma and Grandpa are very good at thinking ahead." "We can all compromise," Trish said. "I know you're not a bad person." "There's no compromise," Denny said. Given time, you'll see what's best for Zoe," replied Trish. "Enzo!" Zoe called out suddenly, locating me beneath her. She squirmed loose of Denny and grabbed me around the neck. "Enzo!" I was so surprised and pleased by her hearty greeting, so I licked her face. Trish leaned into Denny. "You must have been missing Eve terribly," she whispered to him. "You can't begin to imagine," Denny said. He abruptly straightened and pulled away from her. "Zoe," he said. Enzo and I are going to watch from a special spot. Come on, Enzo. He bent down and kissed her forehead, and he walked away. Zoe and Trish watched us go. We continued on the circular path and walked up the bump of a hill to the top. We stood underneath the trees and protected from the lightly falling rain, watched the whole thing. The people coming to attention, the man reading from a book, the people laying roses on the coffin, and everyone leaving in their cars. When they were all done, we walked down the hill, and we stood before the mound of dirt and cried. We kneeled, and we cried, and we grabbed a handful of the dirt, the mound, and we felt the last bit of her, the last part of her that we could feel, and we cried. And finally, when we could do no more, we stood, and we began the long walk home. That's the end of chapter 35. Sorry about my dogs going a little crazy in the background. Chapter 36. The morning after Eve's burial, I could barely move. My body was so stiff, I couldn't even stand. And Denny had to look for me because I usually got up immediately and helped him with breakfast. I was 8 years old, 2 years older than Zoe. While I was still too young to suffer an arthritic condition in my hips, that's exactly what I suffered from. It was an unpleasant condition, yes, but in a sense it was a relief that I could concentrate on my own difficulties rather than dwell on other things, specifically Zoe being stranded with the twins. The day after Eve's funeral, Denny took me to the vet. He was a thin man who smelled of hay and who had a bottomless pocket full of treats. He felt my hips, and I tried not to wince, but I couldn't help myself when he squeezed certain places. He diagnosed me, prescribed medication, and said there was nothing else he could do, except someday in the future perform expensive surgery to replace my defective parts. Denny thanked him, and we drove home. "You have arthritis in your hips," he said to me. If I had fingers, I'd have shoved them into my ears until I burst my own eardrums. Anything to avoid hearing. "Arthritis," he repeated, shaking his head in amazement. I shook my head too. With my diagnosis, I knew would come my end. Slowly, perhaps, painfully, without a doubt. Marked by the signposts laid out by the veterinarian. The visible becomes inevitable. The car goes where the eyes go. I thought of Eve and how quickly she embraced her death once the people around her agreed to it. I considered the foretelling of my own, and I tried to look away. Chapter 37. The charges of criminal neglect were dropped, and as Mark Fain had promised, but the temporary restraining order and the civil custody suit were still in place, which meant Denny didn't get to see Zoe at all for several months. Maxwell and Trish filed a motion to terminate Denny's right to custody of any kind, since he was clearly an unfit parent. Well, we all play by the same rules, but some people spend more time reading those rules and figuring out how to make them work in their behalf. I've seen movies that involve stolen children and the grief and terror that the parents feel when their children are taken by strangers. Denny felt every bit of that grief, and, in my own way, I did too. And we knew where Zoe was. We knew who had taken her. Still, we could do nothing. Mark Fain suggested it would be a bad idea to tell Zoe about the legal proceedings. He suggested that Denny invent a story about driving race cars in Europe to explain his prolonged absence. Mark Fain also negotiated a letter exchange. Notes and drawings made by Zoe would be delivered to Denny, and Denny could write letters to his child, as long as he agreed to allow those letters to be reviewed by the twins before they were shown to Zoe. I will tell you, Every vertical surface in our house was decorated with Zoe's delightful artwork. As much as I wanted Denny to act, I respected his restraint. Denny has long admired the legendary driver Emerson Fittipaldi. Emo, he was called, was a champion of great stature. Not only did Emo never panic, Emo never put himself in a position where he might have to. Like Emo, Denny never took unnecessary risks. While I, too, admire the try to emulate Emo, I still think that I would like to drive like Ayrton Senna, full of emotion and daring. I would like to have driven by Zoe's school one day to pick her up unannounced, and then headed directly for Canada, where we could live by ourselves in peace for the rest of our lives. But it was not my choice. I was not behind the wheel. No one thought about me, which is why they all panicked when Zoe asked her grandparents if she could see me. You see, no one had accounted for my whereabouts. The twins immediately called Mark Fane, who immediately called Denny. No, thank you. Tell her of course she can see Enzo, Denny said calmly. Enzo is staying with Mike and Tony while I'm in Europe. Zoe likes them, and she'll believe it. I'll have Mike bring Enzo over on Saturday. And that's what happened. In the early afternoon, Mike picked me up and drove me over to Mercer Island, and I spent the afternoon playing with Zoe on the great lawn. Before dinner time, Mike returned me to Denny. How did she look? Denny asked Mike. She looked terrific, Mike said. She has her mother's smile. They had a good time together? Asked Denny. A fantastic time, replied Mike. They played all day. Fetch? Denny asked, thirsty for details. Did she use the chuck it, or did they play chase? Eve never liked it when they played chase. No, mostly fetch, Mike said kindly. You know, Mike said. Sometimes they just flopped down on the grass and cuddled together. It was really sweet. Denny wiped his nose quickly. Thanks, Mike, he said. Really, thanks a lot. Anytime, Mike said. I appreciated Mike's effort to appease Denny, even though he was avoiding the truth. Or maybe Mike didn't see what I saw. Maybe he couldn't hear what I heard. Zoe's profound sadness, her loneliness, her whispered plans that she and I would somehow smuggle ourselves off to Europe and find her father. That summer without Zoe was very painful for Denny. In addition to feeling isolated from his daughter, he felt his career was derailed. Though he was offered the opportunity to drive again, he was forced to decline, as the pending criminal case demanded that he remain in the state of Washington at all times. He was a prisoner of the state. And yet, I won't say he created the situation, but he allowed it, because he needed to test his mettle. He wanted to know how long he could keep his foot on the accelerator before lifting. He chose this life, and therefore he chose this battle. And I realized, as the summer matured, and I frequently visited Zoe without Denny, that I was a part of this too. I was an important part. Because of those late Saturday afternoons in July, Denny would sit with me on the back porch and quiz me. Did you play fetch? Did you tug? Did you chase? He would ask. Did you cuddle? He would ask. How did she look? Is she eating enough fruit? Are they buying organic? I tried as hard as I could to form words for him, but they wouldn't come. I tried to beam my thoughts into his head. I tried to send the pictures I saw in my mind. I twitched my ears, I cocked my head, I nodded, I pawed, until he smiled at me and stood. Thanks, Enzo, he would say on those days. You're not too tired, are you? I would stand and wag. I'm never too tired. Let's go then. He would grab the chucket and the tennis ball and walk me down to Blue Dog Park. There we would play fetch until the light grew thin and the mosquitoes came out of hiding, thirsty for their dinner. Chapter 38. There was an occasion that summer when Denny found a teaching engagement in Spokane and asked if the twins could take me for the weekend. They agreed, as they had grown accustomed to my presence in their home. I would much rather have gone to racing school with Denny, but I understood that he depended on me to take care of Zoe. Also, to act as some kind of witness on his behalf. Though I could not relate to him the details of our visits, my presence, I think, reassured him in some way. On a Friday afternoon, I was delivered by Mike into Zoe's waiting embrace. She immediately ushered me into her room, and we played a game of dress-up together. I knew my role as a jester in Zoe's court, and I was happy to play the part. That evening, Maxwell took me outside earlier than usual, urging me to get busy. When I came back inside, I was led to Zoe's room, which already had my bed in it. Apparently, she had requested I sleep with her. I curled into a ball and quickly dozed off. A bit later, I awoke. The lights were dim. Zoe was awake and active, encircling my bed with piles of her stuffed animals. "They'll keep you company," she whispered to me as she surrounded me. Seemingly hundreds of them, all shapes and sizes. I was being surrounded by teddy bears and giraffes, sharks and dogs, cats and birds and snakes. She worked steadily, and I watched, until I was buried in stuffed animals. I found it somewhat amusing and touching that Zoe cared to share me with her animals in that way. I drifted off to sleep, feeling protected and safe. I awoke later in the night and saw the wall of animals around me was quite high. Still, I was able to shift my weight and change positions to make myself more comfortable. But when I did, I was shocked by a frightening sight. One of the animals, the one on top, staring straight at me. It was the zebra. The replacement zebra. The one she had chosen to fill in for the demon that had dismantled itself before me so long ago. The horrifying zebra of my past. The demon had returned, and though it was dark in the room, I knew I saw a glint of light in its eyes. As you can imagine, my sleep was sparse that night. The last thing I wanted was to awaken amid animal destruction because the demon had returned. I forced myself to stay awake, yet I couldn't help but drift off. Each time I opened my eyes, I found the zebra staring at me, like a gargoyle. It stood on a cathedral of animals above me, watching. The other animals had no life. They were toys. The zebra alone knew. I felt sluggish all day, but I did my best to keep up, and I tried to catch up on my sleep by napping quietly. To any observer, I'm sure I gave off the impression of being quite contented, but I was anxious about nightfall, concerned that once again the zebra would torture me with its mocking eyes. That afternoon, as the twins took their alcohol on the deck, as they tended to do, and Zoe watched television in the TV room, I dozed outside in the sun, and I heard them. "I know what's best for her," Trish said, "but I still feel badly for him." "It's for the best," Maxwell said. "I know, but still." "He didn't pick up Zoe when he should have," Maxwell said, sternly. On not just one, but several occasions, he endangered her life with his reckless driving, and he caused her to get frostbite, which can cause permanent nerve damage. What kind of father is he? I lifted my head from the warm wood of the deck, and I saw Trish cluck and shake her head. "What?" Maxwell demanded. Trish said, "From what I hear, it was a big misunderstanding." "What you hear?" Maxwell blurted. "He didn't." I know, said Trish. "It's just that this has all gotten blown out of proportion." "Are you suggesting that he's a good father?" "No," Trish said. "But didn't you exaggerate the situation because you were certain we would get custody of Zoe?" "I don't care about any of that," Maxwell said, waving her off. "He wasn't good enough for Eve, and he's not good enough for Zoe. And if he's stupid enough to devote so much time to that car racing that he forgets about his own daughter, then I'm going to seize the moment. Zoe will have a better childhood with us. She will have a better moral raising, a better financial raising, a better family life. And you know it, Trish, you know it." I know, she said, and sipped her amber drink with a bright red cherry drowned at the bottom of the glass. "But he's not a bad person." He poured his drink down his gullet and slapped the glass down on the teak table. "It's time to start dinner," he said, and he went inside. I was stunned. I had been suspicious since the beginning, but to hear the words, the coldness in Maxwell's tone. Imagine this. Imagine having your wife die suddenly of brain cancer. Then imagine having her parents attack you mercilessly in order to gain custody of your daughter. Imagine that they exploit allegations of neglect against you. Then they hire very expensive and clever lawyers because they have so much money. Imagine that they prevent you from having any contact with your 6-year-old daughter for months on end. And imagine they restrict your ability to earn money to support yourself and, of course, as you hope, your daughter. How long would you last before your will was broken? They had no idea who they were dealing with. Denny would not kneel before them. He would never quit. He would never break. With disgust, I followed them into the house. Trish began her preparations, and Maxwell took his jar of peppers from the refrigerator. Inside me, a darkness brewed. Contrivers, manipulators. They were no longer people to me. They were now the evil twins. Evil, horrible people who stuffed themselves with burning hot peppers in order to fuel their fire in their stomachs. When they laughed, flames shot from their noses. They were disgusting creatures. My anger with the evil twins fed my thirst for revenge, and I was not above using the tools of my dogness to exact justice. I presented myself to Maxwell as he stuffed another pepper into his mouth and chewed it with the fake teeth he removed at night. I sat before him. I lifted a paw. "Want a treat?" he asked me. Clearly surprised by my gesture, I barked. "Here you go, boy." He extracted a pepper from the bottle and held it before my nose. It was a very large one, long and artificially green and smelling of chemicals, the devil's candy. "I don't think those are good for dogs," Trish said. "Nelson, leave it. Leave it." "I don't think those are good for dogs," Trish said. "He likes them," Maxwell countered. My first thought was to take the hot pepper and a couple of Maxwell's fingers with it. But that would have caused real problems. I likely would have been put to sleep before Mike could return to save me. So I didn't take his fingers. I did, however, take the pepper. I knew it was bad for me, that I would suffer immediate discomfort. But I knew my discomfort would pass. And I anticipated the unpleasant rebound effect, which is what I wanted. After all, I'm just a stupid dog, unworthy of human scorn, without the brains to be responsible for my own bodily functions. A dumb dog. I observed their dinner carefully, because I wanted to see for myself. The twins served Zoe some kind of chicken covered in a creamy sauce. They didn't know that while Zoe loved chicken cutlets, she never ate them with sauce, and certainly never with cream. Nelson? No, thank you. Sorry, guys. Nelson and Ruby are going a little crazy today. When she didn't eat the string beans they served, Trish asked if she would like a banana instead. Zoe said yes, and Trish made some banana slices. Zoe barely picked at them because they were crudely sliced and speckled with brown spots, which she always avoided. And these agents of evil, these supposed grandparents, thought Zoe would be better off with them? Bah! They didn't spend a moment thinking about her welfare after dinner, and didn't even ask why she hadn't eaten her bananas. They allowed her to leave the table, having eaten almost nothing. Denny never would have allowed that. He would have prepared for her something else she liked, something she would continue to grow in a healthy way. All the while I watched, I seethed, and in my stomach, a foul brew steeped. When it was time to take me out that night, Maxwell opened the French door to the back deck and began his idiotic chanting, "Get busy, boy, get busy." I didn't go outside. I looked up at him, and I thought about what he was doing, how he was tearing our family apart for his own selfish purposes. I thought about how he and Trish were grossly inferior guardians for my Zoe. I crouched in a stance right there, inside the house, and I unleashed a massive, soupy, pungent pile of diarrhea on his beautiful, expensive, linen-colored Berber carpet. "What the heck?" he shouted at me. "Bad dog!" I turned and trotted cheerfully to Zoe's room. "Get busy, boy," I said as I left, but of course he couldn't hear me. As I settled into my pile of stuffed animals, I heard Maxwell exclaim loudly and call for Trish to clean up my mess. I looked at the zebra, still perched on his throne of lifeless animal carcasses, and I growled at it very softly, but very dangerously. And the demon knew. The demon knew not to mess with me that night. Not that night, or ever again. We'll stop our reading there with a nice howl from from Ruby in the background. We'll get going. We got about this much left of the book. We're on page 201 now. So I look forward to posting another video, probably on Thursday, as long as YouTube agrees with me. See you guys. I miss you. Let me know what you thought about those chapters.